Rcast. Welcome to the Climate and Coordination Rcast, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's iteration of the Climate and Coordination Rcast. We have a lot to talk about today, I'm sure. I'm sure there will be lots of topics, but I'll just get us started here with this first one from The Guardian. I have been reading so much about climate in The Guardian. I said this like a week or two ago, but I think I'm going to actually say this might be the best source of climate news. They always have such a good section on this. I don't even know what to say. I just think that they always have a ton of really good quality information about everything to do with climate. So I'm very grateful to The Guardian because whenever I get stuck and can't find anything, there's always something there. So from The Guardian, November 1st, Adam Morton is the author. Headline is, "Lack of climate action over 50 years will cost the Australian economy $3.4 trillion and 880,000 jobs." There's a little headline beneath that says, if policies promoting net zero emissions by 2050 are adopted, 250,000 jobs will be created and $600 billion will be added to the economy. And this is just for Australia. So the reason I chose this is because I remember last week or the week before we were talking about how important it was to financially align people with green solutions, I guess you could say, or with solving the climate crisis, or however you want to say it. But this is a really staggering piece. It says, quote, "The report suggested Australia would experience an economic hit on par with COVID-19 every year by 2050 if the climate crisis was not addressed." And then, you just expand that for all the nations around the world, and you start to see how expensive it is to not act. And I just think that's a really, important warning to make, is that not solving this problem is extremely expensive. Of course, not just in the financial sense, it's also expensive in the spiritual sense and in the moral sense and other senses. But this is one of the best sort of short but well-linked articles about the cost of not solving the climate crisis that I've seen. So if anybody listening wants to check this out, go to The Guardian and type in lack of climate action over 50 years and you will find it. So anyway, what do people have to say about this?
Well, the fact that it's Deloitte does make you sit up and take notice. It should make companies sit up and take notice.
And why is that?
Well, Deloitte and Touche is really well known.
They're like one of the top 5 auditing companies in the world. So when companies get accounts audited, Deloitte's one of the candidates often.
Oh wow! Okay.
So I think that's a really interesting spot, because what Adam Morton's done is managed to get hold of a report from them and then interview the authors. So it kind of, it's not scaremongering. it's a piece of critical analysis by a very reputable firm. I wonder what the other companies similar to Deloitte have done, whether they've done something similar.
I bet Anderson did something similar for Goldman, right?
I mean, yeah, they're all doing it, right? They're all. But, well, actually, there was one more thing I wanted to read from this. I forgot, sorry. And then, Greg, go ahead. It says, modeling from different sources has routinely found the cost of waiting would be greater than acting now. That finding has become more pronounced as the cost of renewable energy reduced substantially in recent years. Last month, the International Energy Agency, the IEA, said solar was the cheapest form of energy in human history. Isn't that a staggering thing to say? That's from carbonbrief.org. So you can click on that link and read about it. But I've never even heard that statement made before. It's just shocking.
Well, I've always felt, you've got this giant fusion reactor in the middle of the solar system. Maybe make use of it. It's like the source of all life, right?
Exactly.
If we didn't have the sun just pouring energy into the planet Earth,
Right.
There would be no greenery, no fauna, nothing.
Yeah, well, and also the nice thing is it's probably not going to be extinguished for at least a couple 100 billion years. So,
well, there's an equation that governs the likelihood of us being able to do interstellar travel, right? And to do interstellar travel, the thought process is that a civilization must exist in that little golden area that the Earth is in, and must be able to harness the power of their sun in order to escape and do interstellar type travel. And that there's no way that interstellar travel could happen until you've done that, right? So, and to harness the power of the sun literally means being able to harness all of it in a controlled way. Not through solar panels, that's far too indirect. But if you put a cage around the sun in a science fiction film, that sort of thing, and that's what the equation drives at. So it's not really a surprise that the sun, just as Greg said, you've got this big fusion reactor in the sky, and we're only getting a tiny piece of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Civilization will have to be able to get more in a sustainable way.
Well, I actually prefer the language of regenerative. All of life around us, including our own lives, speaks directly to the regenerative nature of life. I feel like our technology is really way off when it doesn't align itself with this regenerative nature. It's very interesting. Vlad Zamfir was talking about how law is not a system, and I was thinking about his comment, and I was realizing, a notion of law that allowed us to combine local codes would be much more interesting. And a notion of law that allowed us to evolve law to adapt and address the changing environment would also be much more interesting.
So when you say law, do you mean law in the widest sense, so including physical laws as well as the laws that we use to govern ourselves?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question, and it's a question that I've often asked Vlad. So I don't believe that Vlad is talking about physical laws. I believe he's talking about conflict resolution.
Right, and at which point it's very interesting, because I was working with a company called D2LT. So D2L and T. They do what they call smart legal advice for companies trading derivatives. And they have a form of encoding of the laws that govern how derivatives are dealt with in the event of one or more parties defaulting on their side. And they've actually got a grant in at the moment to use AI techniques to harvest the legal contracts and make them effectively something akin to a smart contract.
It might work in that area of law. I know, for example, in family law and in other domains, the lawyers know that there are contradictions within the code. So that's part of the reason human intelligence is so required in the field of law, is because people understand that the code is actually not consistent. And learning how to navigate that in which courtroom is something that a human figures out. But by now maybe that AI has gotten so good.
Yeah. I mean, imagine a world that in which the conflicts that exist in the legal codes can be readily identified, so that no one lawyer has knowledge that any other lawyer doesn't have. So they're all equal. And that means that the arguments, instead of being about a point of law, are about a point of justice. And that's a different thing. And ultimately, that's the thing that sways often when it's trial by jury. There's a sense of delivering justice. That may be an innocent verdict or a guilty verdict. But when you get that torturous arguments about points of law, it detracts from the delivery of justice.
Yeah, often it does. In many cases. Did you
Okay,
have another article, Nora?
Yes, I do have another one, and this one is unfortunately not quite as sunshiny as the other ones, but this is really important because as the world is, I feel, pretty preoccupied with the presidential election, which at the time of this recording we still don't have a clear outcome of. There is a lot that is still happening in the world. For example, I don't know if you guys have seen, but Spain has experienced absolutely torrential flooding again. Spain is really in trouble, and there are quite a few very real crises threatening human life going around the world. But anyway, aside from that, this is an extremely important development. This is from the Smithsonian Magazine, from an author whose name I think is pronounced Rasha Aridi, but I could be wrong. This is from October 26th, only 1 week ago. Headline: Arctic sea ice fails to refreeze by late October, setting a new record. At this rate, the Arctic will experience its first ice-free summer as early as 2035, which is only 15 years away. That's as far away as 2005 is from us now. So this is a really big story. I obviously am very deep in climate Twitter. I love climate Twitter. It's amazing. Network of people there, young and old, around the world that are always talking about what's going on. Is extremely valuable resource, I think. But this was something that was definitely talked about a week ago. I just didn't see it much on the mainstream news because I feel like the election has really taken the front seat here. But anyway, the first paragraph here is pretty clear. Despite this being a pretty heavy science publication, they always write in a way that anybody can understand. So it says here, quote, "With winter just around the corner, the lactive sea in the Arctic Circle should be starting to form thick sheets of sea ice as temperatures in the northern hemisphere plunge. But the seascape looks drastically different this year. It's already late October and the lactive sea hasn't refrozen, setting a new record for the latest delay in ice formation the sea has ever experienced." And that's, of course, taken from The Guardian, because The Guardian is amazing.
Wow, that's where I read it.
So I just wanted to say this because the reason I wanted to bring it up is not only because it's like cataclysmically historic on like a geologic level. I don't know when the last time this happened was, but I don't think humans were around to see it. The next thing is just that a lot of climate skeptics, climate denial people are like, oh yeah, well of course the ice goes down in the summer, it comes back in the winter, and they think all the images of the ice receding from mountains and glaciers is just pictures like cherry picked from July or whatever. But it's not, and this is this is an article that explains in great detail how the ice is not coming back. So satellite records show, this says here, a 13% decrease in sea ice per decade since the 1980s. So this is really historic. And when I read this, I got like some chills just reading it, because it's just like extremely historic. So anyway, there's a great link to the NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, with another source. And obviously the cherry on top of this, before I allow everybody to comment, is that apparently since 2007 to 2020, those have been the years with the 14 lowest ice years in recorded history. So this is since Barack Obama until now. That means we've had the lowest ice recorded ever. So there you go. That's the facts for today. I don't even know what to say about it.
Well, the connection I would make to the election actually is, I feel really sad for whoever is the winner, because whoever is the winner is going to preside over increasingly cataclysmic climate events. No matter what their policies are, no matter how hard we work, we're going to be facing more and more cataclysmic climate related events that we brought upon ourselves. And so, I've I mean, like if you do it right, the job of POTUS is a thankless job. There's always plenty of people to tell you to exactly how badly you're screwing it up.
And nobody notices when you get it right.
I know, and well, it's always somebody else's idea when you get it right.
And of course they say the presidency is supposed to age the president, but not the people, right?
So it's, I mean, it's not a fun job, but it's not going to be fun at all in the upcoming years. So I mean, all the data that you've pointed to is exactly that. And, those kinds of systems, I don't know how we get them back.
I don't think you get them back unless, and it's an evolutionary thing as to whether we take the step or not, but unless you rid yourself of the notion of statehood and nationhood and act as one, the die is cast. We'll be a fairly irrelevant species that had our time on this planet. And there won't be so much fossil evidence because we haven't been around long enough. So that's one avenue that you go down, unfortunately. And the other is that at the 11th hour, humanity somehow has the technology to have that safe communication and collaboration and acts holistically. Which is why you want RChain to survive, through an awful lot. It's certainly done that so far, and expand, and you want other RChains coming into being, so that there is this connectedness, and this ability, therefore, to act locally, but truly think globally.
Exactly. I have an article that kind of, I think, might apply to what you're just saying, that I wanted to bring to the table. And it is involving politics, but I hope it isn't political, because I think it carries across every leaning of thought. So I'm just going to post it here in the chat. And the headline is, Facebook curtails misleading posts live video as election misinformation spreads. And I'm just going to read the whole article, and then I have some things I've prepared that I'd like to kind of talk about, that hopefully will draw it away from being a political discussion and more into how do we solve this. So I'll just read the article here. The move comes as calls mount for the social networks to get tougher on false claims by Trump and his supporters. Facebook tightened its policies on election-related disinformation Thursday, limiting the reach of live videos and misleading posts in the latest effort by the world's largest social network to tamp down on onslaught of baseless claims about vote rigging and premature victory claims. The move comes as Facebook and other social networks face mounting criticism from the left that they are not doing enough to stop the spread of false claims that could undermine faith in the election and the results when they're declared. Some prominent Democrats have called for the platforms to suspend the account of President Donald Trump, whose posts alleging electoral fraud have received warning labels on both Facebook and Twitter. Facebook said it will now restrict posts on both Instagram and Facebook that its systems flag as misinformation so that they are seen by fewer users. It's also limiting the distribution of election-related live videos on its Facebook platform. And here's a quote from Facebook. As voting counting continues, we are seeing more reports of inaccurate claims about the election. While many of these claims have low engagement on our platform, we are taking additional temporary steps, which we've previously discussed, to keep this content from reaching more people. Misinformation researchers say live streamed videos have been a blind spot for major internet companies, in part because they're more difficult to review with artificial intelligence software and thus more challenging to moderate en masse. Renee DiResta, the technical research manager at Stanford Internet Observatory, said some conservative influencers use live videos to spread conspiracy theories and rile up supporters. Others use deceptive editing of live videos to make a protest or an interaction with election officials look like evidence for a baseless narrative. Let's see here. Maybe I'll just kind of go to the end here. Let's see. So there's another article that I'll just quickly mention here. And this happened while I was writing, actually at 2 a.m. this morning. I couldn't sleep. And Donald Trump was up also at 2 a.m. and he tweeted and said, I'll quote directly from his tweet, I easily win the presidency of the United States with legal votes cast. The observers were not allowed in any way, shape, or form to do their job, and therefore votes accepted during this period must be determined to be illegal votes. The U.S. Supreme Court should decide. So the interesting thing that I find about this is that how Facebook and Twitter have reacted to this stuff. So Twitter allowed the tweet to go through, but it put a disclaimer at the top of the tweet that says, some or all of the content shared in this tweet is disputed and might be misleading about an election or other civic process. So the thing that I just wanted to kind of bring up is not that whether someone in particular is spreading misinformation, but how the social networks are dealing with it, and why that is actually a big problem. So the biggest social networks in the world are, in a panicked way, flailing around experimenting with a very centralized top-down approach by flagging and censoring the information that users post on their network, including the actual president himself. But it isn't working. The Twitter messages and Facebook censoring only serve to reinforce Trump followers to believe that their conspiracies about the control of information and disseminating what they believe is fake news as a product of big tech, attempting to control what we think. So they're moving further underground to other platforms, and there's plenty to choose from. Gab, Parler, BitChute, Minds, WeWe, et cetera, that don't censor them and allow them to continue doing what they're doing. So this is such a huge problem that it appears to be leading to massive civil unrest and a breakdown of the very foundation of democracy and systems of checks and balances in the US. So what's the solution? How can we solve this massive problem? So the way I'd like to kind of look at this is through the eyes of this doesn't seem related, but here I go. So I recall seeing an interview with Sam Phillips, the man who was credited with discovering Elvis. So Sam Phillips was asked, this was back in the 90s, he was asked, what's wrong with today's pop music? And his answer was potent. He said, there's no need in it. Nothing comes close to the impact of someone singing and playing a piece of music because they need to do it. When the young struggling trucker came into Sun Records to pay $3.25 to cut a record for his mother as a birthday gift and opened his mouth, the sound of need came through. And the assistant, Marion Keisker, recorded him in Sun Studios. And when she did, the need struck her deeply, and she told Sam Phillips to check him out, and the rest is history. So we now have a desperate need to solve this. We at RChain, we've been working on the architecture to allow for an open source social network alternative that fosters collective intelligence for several years now, and it's now become a dire need. The future of the US and the planet now depends on it. We need to create a new system where the truth can be verified around an architecture that allows for truth to naturally rise to the top, and where people can actually benefit from the data they produce, rather than have it plundered and siphoned into a few massive silos. We can do this now, and we must do this. One thing about
the question is
blockchain,
how to do it.
Yeah. So
it's what's the first step and what's the second step?
Yeah. So one thing about blockchain that is so fascinating to me is the idea around collective agreement about the verification around a transaction. It's generally referred to as trustless. But I'd like to think of it more as trustful, as a trustful approach. The thing that makes Bitcoin succeed is that it's a public ledger. Everyone can look at it and verify it. Sure, you could look at it as a trustless system because you don't need the trust. You don't need to trust anybody or any person to verify it. So no trust required. But I'd like to envision it as a trustful system because the thing that makes it work is the fact that all of our eyeballs can observe and verify it. The system only works when you have a large group of people who can look at it and verify it. We can trust it because we trust each other's ability to verify it together. It's talking about the same thing, but it's a very different mindset. Saying trustful recognizes that we need each other to look at it and verify something. Bitcoin doesn't exist without people. Bitcoin needs people to act together and agree around something. Saying trustless avoids confronting the fact that our social abilities are our superpower, as Greg says. So I see a new system of coordination that revolves around the spirit of trustful consensus around a decision about something. And so it's kind of an internal mantra of mine when thinking about how to build a system that allows for the blossoming of a collective intelligence. And it comes from Larry Lessig's book, Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace. So he says there's 4 ways that human behavior is controlled in a system: law, market, norms, and architecture. And a healthy system has a strong set of norms that allow for civilized behavior with how we work together and trust each other. But it can't arise without the architecture that allows for it. So I recall hanging out with a fascinating person who was a professional architect, and I've always found that field intriguing. And I asked him, what's the definition of architecture? And he said that there are many ways to parse it out, but he believed that it all revolves around the study of the flow of people. So thinking of architecture in the terms of the flow of people is an interesting way to think of things when designing the architecture of an open source social network that fosters collective intelligence. I think of us as a species who are about to experience a renaissance of sorts. As Daniel Schmachtenberger calls it, humanity's phase shift. Currently, we're like moles, where we don't quite have eyes yet, but there's these fleshy bumps where the eyes could be forming. We're about to awaken as a species to look around at each other in a new way that will allow us to become collectively self-aware. They say that one thing that isolates us from other species is our ability to be individually self-aware. But in order to survive, we have to expand our self-awareness to a global level, like what you were talking about, Steve. Jeremy Rifkin, when talking about the empathic civilization, speaks of how our empathic circles continued to expand as we evolved and expanded our social skills superpower. We started with families, then tribes, then villages, then towns, then cities, civilization, then finally nations. We have now pretty much filled up every corner of the habitable planet, with the last land-conquering great empire reaching its peak. The next step is to expand our empathic circle outside of nations to a global awareness of each other. As we continue to develop exponentially powerful tools of coordination, we will be able to process, verify, and absorb massive amounts of data, and we'll begin to witness in real time how we affect each other globally. And as we collectively confront the unprecedentedly global problem of climate change, humanity's superpower will be put to the greatest test we have ever encountered. Anyways, that's what I wrote up this morning at 2 in the morning.
Oh, wow, you wrote all that. Wow, that was amazing.
No, it's
great.
fantastically beautiful. I appreciate you and laud you for continuing to be the conscience of RChain.
And dare I say, it needs to go onto the RChain Medium blog.
Yes, please do. Please do.
Sorry, Greg, continue, but Darryl, that was beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it does. Sorry, just one, just to reiterate, really, about. There's a movie called The Day the Earth Stood Still. You must have seen it. There's an old black and white one, and there's one with Keanu Reeves, and in it, this alien comes down, stops the planet dead, not from spinning, but everything's stopped. As a period of reflection before they decide whether they're going to kill us all or not, as to whether we're worthy to inhabit the universe. And there's a line, certainly in the first one, and actually in the second one, and I think it's John Cleese that has the line as a professor. And he's the one that said in the movie, it is only at the 11th hour that historically humanity has turned a corner. Right? And I think that is, Lovelock predicts it. Lovelock's predicted it for the last 10 years. Certainly since his late 80s, and he's 101, I think, this year. He's been predicting that we're past. He's been saying we're past that point of things not changing. So there will be change, and in that change, it's not just the climate that's changing; it's our reaction to the climate change that will drive some behaviours. And so expect to see more dead bodies in the Mediterranean. Expect to see more dead bodies in the Straits of Dover, right? We're going to see this. You guys who are younger than me are going to see more of it than I do, but it's going to happen. It's not going to happen overnight, but the stresses and strains on humanity are so great that there's an inevitability about it. It's happening now. Syria and the mass migration out of Syria isn't just about conflict. It was also, I think you mentioned this in a previous podcast, Nora, that actually some of it's driven by climate change.
Yeah.
So we're seeing that upheaval. And at the 11th hour, we hope.
Well, I want to just chime in here, Darryl. Since you've opened the door, I want to take a peek at what's on the other side of that. Part of the reason I've mentioned so many times the Immortality Key by Brian Murarescu is because he's tugging at something that I think is a real law that we have to address. It's echoed in so many stories that if we don't pay attention, then we have only ourselves to blame. And that is that what you're asking for is a movement of the exoteric, so the outside, to the inside, the esoteric. You're asking for a movement of a great number of people into a new realm. Right? And whenever that happens, you look at every story, right? The the story of Christ is a well-known one, but there are many stories like this, where whenever someone attempts to open that door and move the exoteric to the esoteric, a price has to be paid. And it's a big price. So, and I've been thinking a lot about, I've made have not hidden this. The RChain bits, they're just a tiny piece of the puzzle. The larger piece of the puzzle is a range of spiritual technologies that have to be employed. And one of the reasons I've been looking more carefully at Brian Murarescu's proposals, which are historical scholarship proposals, is because they connect to a tradition in the West that was perniciously and persistently stamped out by the Catholic Church, right? So the Eleusinian mysteries, the Greek sacraments, the graveyard beers, all of those things which utilized pharmacological wisdom cultivated over centuries and centuries, millennia, to give people a taste of a wider consciousness, was and which was primarily controlled by women, the knowledge of which was primarily the job of women, was perniciously stamped out by the Catholic Church, at least according to Murarescu's scholarship and the scholarship of folks like Rusk and others. So the main point is that was a mechanism by which you could move larger groups of people from the outside to the inside, if you take my meaning. And so, this idea of there being, a range of sacraments that we can construct, and we can use science to do this, right? But a range of sacraments that can accelerate that process is one that is probably worth considering at this point, because the time frame is so short. But whatever is done, there's a law that's going to extract a price. And I hate to sound woo-woo, but it is really perilous to avoid what seems to be encoded in our cultural DNA.
So how do you see that price being paid?
It's a good question, and the problem is it's almost always a surprise. It's really hard to predict the direction from which it comes. Right? We often anthropomorphize it. We put it in terms of sacrificial lamb and these kinds of things. Maybe it's merely the cost of bearing the consequences of what we've done to planet Earth. Maybe that's the price. I don't know, but I do want to suggest that you're right. We have to make this transformation, but this transformation comes with a very significant price tag. Yeah, the hero's journey here is not it's not just about the 11th hour, at the nadir of the hero's capacity. A miracle occurs and she finds a way. There's something deeper here that every single major archetype that talks about this kind of process speaks to this. But what do I know? I'm just a stupid mathematician.
I mean, you know quite a few things, but I can't help but think that Lovelock predicts all sorts of potentially doom scenarios. People fighting for water, right? I mean, all of those things. It's climactic change that drives people's behaviour when they search for water, search for food. this is what will happen. And of course, if you push people enough, and you've got more than they have, and you erect barriers, that's actually going to exacerbate the situation. Ultimately, it won't actually fix it. However, you have to recognize that, as Greg said, there's a price to be paid. I mean, it's too late for there to be no price. The price is already being paid, right? If it's not in terms of so much human life, it certainly is in terms of, the ice and all that means for the ecology across the planet. So the price is being paid, and there will be a consequence for humanity, right? But if we're part of this Gaia will set that right. Now, that cost may be that there's less of us. That cost may be that we somehow, going to the spiritual thing that you mentioned, Greg, that somehow we are more spiritually grounded on this earth that we live in or upon, that we are connected to it. And if you want a vision of what I mean by connected, it is a sort of Findhorny vision. It's the vision of in Avatar, with the really tall people without the 5 fingers, right? And the way that they are connected to their environment, to their earth, to their planet. And when we spiritually reconnect to being part of this planet and rooted to it, only then will we see its value. And for that to occur, we need to be shown some truths by Gaia. And Gaia as a system will show those truths. There's nothing that we can do about it. Gaia was always going to show us those truths the minute we crossed a particular line. And I think that line's crossed.
Yeah,
That's my view.
No, I absolutely agree with you, Steve. I mean, I think to bring it down to concrete terms, in terms of the election, the issue, the thing that we actually have to sacrifice is our separateness. We're not separate, and we can't maintain that illusion anymore.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, the nation state.
Yeah, and that's a big sacrifice, right? I mean, if you look at the map of the U.S. Election, right, the way the votes were cast, it looks divided, separated, and it's we're going to have to learn how to make the most of those divisions in the same way that the body makes divisions of, the heart from the lungs, the lungs from the liver, and so on. So division doesn't keep us separated. And that's it's a difficult lesson to learn, how to make the most of our differences.
And we don't have
and it's
completely
amazing, Steve. Oh, go ahead, Darryl. Sorry.
Sorry, Nora. I was just going to say, we don't have to completely agree about everything and all worship the same God together. We just need to figure out how to coordinate.
Sure, and that's what I was saying. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's the why. Why would somebody be compelled to coordinate through RChain, for instance? So one's getting the message out there, they didn't know about it. But the point at which somebody says, you know what, I'm going to get connected into that RChain thing, because of who we are and what we say about RChain consistently, and it's been consistently from day one, people will come because there is a degree of trust in that we have similar objectives. That's why people fundamentally will make that decision. But they have to have a particular sort of relationship, really. Well, they have to have a relationship to the world that we live in and recognize it. Not as if we're aliens parachuted onto a planet that isn't ours, so we don't give a shit, right? They have to embrace that notion of being part of something bigger. This is exactly kind of, I think, also what Greg's saying. It's not about nationhood, it's about planethood.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we kind of need to embrace. And to do that, you need a coordination platform that has trust as a first-class object, as it were. You need that technology So it's either that and evolve, or it's actually go back to medieval times.
Yeah, and I've been thinking more about what Greg said on the last Rcast. Just kind of, I'm starting to kind of wrap my head a little bit around the idea of how RChain improves and leads us towards what Tim Berners-Lee might call the semantic web, but leads us towards better search and better kind of ability to exchange data more efficiently, and ultimately coordinate that data. And this is the kind of like foundational platform to allow that to occur. So I guess, yeah, I'm just kind of like trying to envision what it would look like. Like, what would that, how would that end up, how would we start using it? How would we end up, like say 10 years in the future and RChain actually pulls this off and people are starting to coordinate around this technology? What are our devices going to look like? How are we going to be interacting with it?
I mean, if you think about it in terms of social media platforms today and how they get used to conduct our everyday lives in business and in our private lives, the challenge that you have is the incumbents. There are companies out there that provide that facility that people aren't happy with. But for somebody to move, I mean, for somebody to commit Facebook suicide, right, is quite a big thing. There's all the pictures you put on there, all of that stuff, all the posts that you want to keep.
Mm-hmm.
So, if we're going to do it, if you're going to do that, if we're going to attack it from the Facebook angle, with the advertising platform, totally, right? Rad. So with Rad. So there is adverts, there is sponsored content. I won't call them adverts, sponsored content. If you provided a way to export out of Facebook into, RChain social media platform, that would really make a massive difference, because then somebody would do that and then commit suicide on Facebook. And then the source of the stuff that comes across is attributed to them and their Facebook instance, whenever that was, and is locked up. Right? And thereafter, anything that they do has provenance, because it's being carried out on the RChain social media platform.
Right.
But you've got to give people a way to do it easily. If we wait, I mean, it will be another thing to add to the list of things that we want the community to look at and do. But, for the moment, deliberation and voting are kind of like the big ticket items right now. And actually, a social media platform is a form of deliberation, right? So you could look at it that way. So, it's happening. But I think the next big thing, as a result of this conversation, would be to provide some kind of capability to suck in my existing id on the web, and put it somewhere where I felt happier about it.
Yeah, it's kind of.
Well, I do want to just say that we haven't heard from Nora, and in many respects, it's Nora's generation that's going to answer that question for us.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. All I was going to say, I mean, I think it sounds like a really cool idea, and I think people definitely want to leave Facebook, and sometimes people want to leave other platforms too. Maybe we just say they disappear rather than commit suicide. Just,
yes.
For people who are sensitive about that topic.
Yes.
But I think that would be a really valuable, I guess, to use a Greg word, offering. But I also think that, social media really evolves with generations. I mean, I remember, not that Google is really social media, but I remember they were okay, I was in second grade maybe, and they were okay, there's this new thing called Google, and anytime you have a question, you type it in. We all thought it was the stupidest name, ugly rainbow logo, wasn't very sleek. We just thought it was really weird. And, now obviously we all use Google, and now people are using people thought Twitter was like done, and now Twitter is kind of making a comeback, and then Snap kind of went away, and now TikTok is kind of teetering on a future. And so anyway, my point is just that, like, I think people of all ages now have different preferences, but I think the one thing that like unites everybody could be that they don't want to be on an abusive sort of mining social engineering type platform. I mean, you know, people don't want to be part of something that's unethical. So I think that is one thing that can unite a lot of people. And oh my God, we're totally out of time.
So you want to take us out?
Yes. Well, we'll have to continue this next week because we've now ended on a cliffhanger like 3 different times. But that's
We're getting
fine.
the narrative rhythm down.
We are, yes, right. The team is undefeated. So, okay. Thank you, everybody, for listening to our conversation. And please subscribe to RChain on YouTube and follow us on Twitter and Instagram. And you can join the co-op at rchain.coop. And if you want to be a guest on our call, just email us at climate@rchain.coop. And thank you all so much.
Okay.
Yep.
Right.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye, people.
Bye, guys.